That progress has been the success of our NHS vaccination programme, by the huge scale of our testing, and by the sheer sacrifice and the discipline of the British public. And so it's important that we don't put that success and undermine it now by putting it at risk. Getting a vaccination feels like being given your life back. The newly vaccinated thanking the wonderful volunteers, people in tears of relief. But as well as the joy, there's also concern about resurgence of COVID, and it's a caution we absolutely share as a government. And it's why the only route out of this pandemic is careful and prudent, a responsible one. Of course, we're also, as a nation, a group of people who thrive on travel, a nation with family ties across the globe. Notably, nearly 1 in 3 new mothers in the UK was born overseas. And in 2019, UK residents took over 93 million trips abroad. So I'm glad to be standing here today announcing the first, albeit tentative, steps towards unlocking international travel. We want a summer in which, with the help of vaccines and testings, we can reunite families and friends, travel to places we love. We want to start looking outward again. Whilst COVID has isolated us, travel reunites us, even if video calls have kept us all connected during the very long lockdowns. There's simply no substitute for human contact. Travel is, of course, also absolutely crucial to rebuilding our economy, bringing long-awaited relief to hard-hit airlines, airports, the tourism sector, which taxpayers have spent £7 billion in supporting. But I have to be absolutely straight with you. Our success in combating COVID here, with 2/3 of adults now vaccinated, is not yet replicated in many places abroad. We in this country have managed to construct a fortress against COVID, but the disease is still prevalent in other parts of the world, most notably at the moment in India. In fact, more new cases of COVID have been diagnosed around the world in the last 7 days than at any time since this pandemic began. And nobody wants to go back into lockdown, not ever. And that's why today's announcement, removing the stay in the UK restrictions from the 17th of May, is necessarily cautious. We must make absolutely sure that the countries we reconnect with are safe, that their infection rates are low and that their vaccination rates are high. It means making sure that we're not incubating the most dangerous variants, that they're not, and that they have safe and secure surveillance in place. And that's why the Global Travel Task Force has come up with the traffic light system classifying destinations by risk. And this is based on data by the Joint Biosecurity Centre, and it will be published on gov.uk. Red countries are those which should not be visited except in the most extreme of circumstances, where repeated testing and isolation in designated government hotels on return is compulsory. Non-UK residents who've been in a red country in the last 10 days will still be barred from entering the UK. I have to tell you now that due to concern about COVID rates and variants of concern, Turkey, the Maldives, Nepal must regrettably be added to the red list today. Amber countries form the biggest group. As with the red list, you should not be travelling to these places right now. Returnees will have to do tests on 3 separate occasions, once before departure, twice after arrival, and isolate in a place of their choosing for 10 days. Finally, we have the green countries, which you will have the opportunity to visit no earlier than the 17th of May, as long as you take a pre-departure test before returning to England and a second PCR test 2 days after you return. And with these green countries, you will not need to quarantine. And travellers will be glad to hear that we've been successful in driving down the costs of tests. However, by necessity, this initial green list must be, I'm afraid, limited. So I'm announcing today that from May the 17th, you'll be able to travel to 12 green list countries and territories, which includes Portugal, Gibraltar and Israel. I regret the favourite summer destinations like France and Spain and Greece are not yet included, but every 3 weeks from reopening, we'll be reviewing the countries to see how and where we can expand the green list. So this is just a first step. The signs overseas are now more promising as a result of their vaccination programmes beginning to crank up. And as the summer progresses, we hope that more traditional tourist destinations will be unlocked. But we have to turn the key slowly. And green list countries will be placed on a watch list if we start to have any concerns. And if it's necessary because of a new upswing in cases or a new variant, we'll not hesitate to act fast and withdraw green status. So it's up to you to check thoroughly before travelling. And if you're thinking of booking a holiday in a green list destination, please check the restrictions applying to new arrivals. You can get this information on Gov.uk, and it is important because each country has its own restrictions. Indeed, our strong advice is not to book any holiday which does not include a refund in the event that the COVID-related situation changes and you're able to cancel. And I'm afraid we do expect longer delays at airports, and Paul will be saying more about this in just a moment. But all these measures are necessary to protect us from new variants and guard against a resurgence of infections. And that is why the UK has now developed the most comprehensive testing regime on the planet, testing up to 2 million people per day, mobilising our world-leading genome sequencing to spot mutations that could lead to new variants. And these are, if you like, the walls of our fortress, because the first duty of any government is to preserve the safety of its people. But it's also our responsibility to show global leadership, to work with other countries, to create safe standards for international travel. These were the issues I discussed with the G7 transport secretaries when I chaired a meeting with them earlier this week. And I was able to set out our own traffic light system. As part of international leadership, the government's working to develop these standards, global standards for digital travel certification. So from the 17th of May, English residents will be able to use their existing NHS Health app to gain access to their vaccine records. Alternatively, they'll be able to request a paper letter to verify their vaccination status. Now, before I finish, let me make one final point. I know that there are many people watching who might want restrictions to be lifted faster and to go further. And there are, if anything, more people who prefer us to go at a slower pace. What unites us all, I think, is the belief that we don't want to return to the days of misery and suffering and loss. We must keep our fortress built at such a huge cost to all of us secure until brighter days when unrestricted travel will allow us to meet people who mean the most to us. For now, we must tread carefully, respecting the science that will guide us along the way. I'd like now to turn to Jenny to cover the epidemiological situation. Jenny.
Thank you, Secretary. Could I have the first slide, please? So I'm just going to talk through 4 slides which give the epidemiological picture across the UK at the moment. And what we see here is the number of people testing positive for COVID-19 in the UK. Thankfully, the new cases have continued to decline right across all 4 nations. And you can see that from a peak at the start of the year, around 60,000 cases, our latest figure is 2,060, and that's actually a decline of just over 300 from this time last week. And the case rates per 100,000, which have been up in the hundreds, are now down on average to 23 per 100,000. There is some variation across the country, and there is an element of plateauing here, and positivity is plateaued at around 0.8%. Next slide, please. Then moving on to hospital data, and what you'll see is that, as we know, the curve shifts a little bit to the right. People tend to be hospitalised slightly later, about 2 weeks into infection. Again, in the UK, hospital bed occupancy for COVID-19 patients peaked around the middle of January at around 39,000 beds in usage, and since then it has continued to drop dramatically. So hospital admission rates now overall are just above 1 per 100,000, 1.04 in the last week, with again some variation across the country. All UK nations have seen that decline in hospital beds, and we have a decrease of 19% in the preceding week. So currently we have 1,231 people in hospital with COVID. But again, just to note that that very rapid decline is plateauing slightly as we go into May. Next slide, please. So here we have the number of deaths of people who had a positive test result for COVID in the UK. Again, if we look back, we have moved from a very sad position in January to where was well over 1,000 deaths per day associated with COVID. And we're now down to the most recent 7-day average at just 12 deaths per day. Now, of course, every one of those is important and a significant loss, but this shows a considerable decline as we go forward into the summer months. And that means that our daily deaths are now less than 0.1 per 100,000 in each UK nation. And the final slide, please. And this slide shows the number of people who've received a vaccination for COVID-19 in the UK. So the total number of people cumulatively who've received vaccination by the 6th of May. And we have given 35.1 million individuals their first dose. And of these, another 16.8 have received a second dose. So the first dose only are the blue bars. And what you can see now is that orange bar shows the number of individuals who have received both doses. And it is really important at this point to highlight that if you have had one dose, do come back for your second dose, because this is likely to boost your immunity and keep you safer for longer. So, key message there, go and get your jab. As the Transport Secretary has highlighted, this is a really strong part of the armament in the UK and is contributing significantly to those reductions in hospitalisations and case rates. Thank you.
Jenny, thanks very much indeed. I'd like to invite Paul Lincoln, Director General, Border Force, to talk about our ports.
Thank you very much, Transport Secretary. I would like to start by paying tribute to the thousands of men and women across Border Force who, throughout the pandemic, have worked tirelessly to keep the UK safe and secure, all whilst facilitating legitimate trade and travel and helping ensure that the UK's transition from the EU was a smooth one. When I last spoke at one of these press conferences, I said we all look forward to a time when travel is fully back up and running, and Border Force stands ready to provide a warm welcome to the UK. But unfortunately, we are not back to normality yet. And today I want to take this opportunity to set out what people can expect to see at the border in terms of the new traffic light system when travel starts to resume on the 17th of May. Travel will be different. And as the Transport Secretary says, we still need to be cautious. There will continue to be additional health checks for every person crossing our border, and inevitably that will mean it will take longer for most people to enter the UK. These measures have been put in place to protect the hard-fought gains and sacrifices that have been made by individuals and societies in the UK, minimising the risks of importing variants whilst protecting the success of our vaccine rollout. But ensuring the biosecurity of this country is a joint effort. As well as Border Force and wider government, every passenger, every carrier, every seaport and every airport has a role to play in this endeavour. For the time being, passengers will need to expect an increase in the time taken at each stage of their journey. It currently takes a Border Force officer 5 to 10 minutes to complete all the necessary checks, which means even for the most compliant passenger, it might take 14 or 15 times longer to process them before, compared to around 25 seconds. And where people do not have the correct paperwork, it can and has taken considerably longer, including when we need to serve fixed penalty notices for non-compliance. Border Force officers have to date been manually checking that each person has a valid negative COVID-19 test, and that has been taken within 72 hours of their journey to the UK. That everyone has also booked a Day 2 and Day 8 test package. That those travelling from red countries have booked into a quarantine hotel and are handed off to the managed quarantine service. That those arriving from elsewhere understand the requirement to quarantine at home for 10 days. And finally, that people have correctly completed their passenger locator form so that they can be contacted by NHS Test and Trace if necessary. To keep us all safe, ministers all agree that Border Force should check 100% of passengers, and we have and will continue to do so. But we have been taking several steps to significantly improve and speed up this process. We are digitising a number of the checks just mentioned, including the passenger locator form process so it can be used in e-gates. We are providing a simpler process for carriers at check-in, and we'll be increasing the number of Border Force officers that are available to process passengers at immigration desks. We will do all that we can to smooth the process, and the rollout of the summer of our e-gate upgrade programme will help minimise the time at the border for as many people as possible. But the travel industry also needs to play its part by making sure that every passenger is ready for the checks before they meet the border. Nonetheless, passengers should still expect times at the border to take longer as we conduct the checks that the public rightly expect during this global pandemic. Border Force officers will deliver the best service possible, but they will also continue the vital work that they do every day to protect national security, to prevent drugs, weapons and other illicit goods from entering the UK, to crack down on illegal migration and to protect vulnerable people. We all understand that queues are frustrating to those who are travelling, especially after long journeys and with young families and when people want to return to their loved ones. But if we all play our part in complying with the health checks, collectively, we will also all help to ensure the safety of our communities whilst making sure that the gradual increase in international travel is as smooth as possible.
Paul, thanks very much indeed. I'd like now to turn to our first question, which comes from David in West Cornwall.
Keeping the roadmap timetable depends on the vaccine deployment programme continuing successfully. There doesn't seem to be a shortage in vaccine supply at present, but might that success be threatened by a significant shortfall in vaccine uptake, particularly in the younger age groups? If so, what level of uptake is needed to keep to the timetable?
David, thanks very much. I'm going to actually ask Jenny to comment on this, but I will just say the level of uptake has been absolutely phenomenal so far. I think it's fair to say far higher than anyone anticipated when we were talking about these things in advance, and it's one of the reasons that the UK has got itself into this much better situation. It's important that continues, and I'm going to ask Jenny to comment on the supply and the rest of it.
Thank you. Well, I think the important thing here is, as the Transport Secretary has said, we have had brilliant uptake in vaccine in this country. And in fact, we are probably the leading country for vaccine confidence. People are very confident to come forward, and they should be. And you can see that in the data that we have around our case rates, this is making a really strong impact. We're guaranteed to offer a first dose of vaccine to every adult by the end of July. There will be some assurance as we go through on the vaccine production, but we're still on track to do that. And of course, we're just coming into vaccinating the younger age groups, the under 40s. So I think it would be wrong of us to jump to conclusions that the younger people will not take up the vaccine. They have been brilliant in stepping forward to comply, for example, with students with regulations last autumn. So I think we should just wait and see. I think we have every confidence that people will step forward and do that. And I think they will be encouraged by the fact that we now have a long record of doing so in this country.
It has been absolutely tremendous, and long may it continue. We're going to go to Nicola in Surrey. Nicola says the first 2 vaccines were approved for use very quickly, but this process seems to have stalled for the other potential vaccines and why? Well, we know that actually a third vaccine, Moderna, was also approved, and I think in use. But again, Jenny, you're probably best.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, the remarkable thing actually is that we have 3 approved vaccines for a new virus within the short time frame that we have, and they have all undergone the appropriate safety checks and the continued reporting, which you will see through MHRA. I don't think we can say it's stalled at all. We have good progress through, and it's important, of course, that each step is taken. It's not just the government or the scientists that propose these to go through. It's also when trials are finished, and clearly it's important that we take note of those studies. So I think other potential vaccines on their way. It varies slightly across the world, but in fact that offer of a first vaccine to every adult by the end of July should still be in place for the vaccines that we have.
I think it's worth saying as well, the vaccine task force that went out and spent so much time and energy procuring, I think the last figure I saw was something like 570 million vaccines, has put us in a very good position, because it means that we've got a variety of different vaccine candidates that we're able to bring in, including announcements about factories which are producing more here, including in the North East, but very much a collective effort, including with the public, taking up vaccines in such large numbers.
Yeah, and just adding to that, of course, one of the other things that is happening is around looking to check that we have vaccines available going forward against variants of coronavirus, and investment in Public Health England's Porton Down Labs there recently to make sure that we can assess the effectiveness of our current vaccines against new variants, which is just as important, I think, as what we have currently.
Thank you to Nicola in Surrey. We'll go to Caroline Davis at the BBC next.
Thank you, Transport Secretary. Firstly, there are only 12 countries and territories on this list. Many passengers will be very disappointed by that, as will the industry. Why are there so few? And secondly, you've put Turkey on the red list. What does that mean for the UEFA Champions League final that's due to be played there?
Thanks very much. Look, as I explained in my comments, we are having to be cautious about this initially. We don't want to overturn all the brilliant work of, frankly, the British people in taking these vaccines and staying at home and all of that pain. And so we can't do anything to put that at risk. Having said that, although there are only 12 countries and territories, it does include, for example, Portugal and some of its islands, popular holiday destinations, including Israel, who will start to accept people from outside the country. I think it's on the 21st of May. But I do accept that it is a slow but very deliberate rollout of this. And I noted that Heathrow, for example, who you might think would jump on your comments, actually agree that this is the right approach and that this steady, slow process initially is the right way to go. It's worth pointing out there are 2 separate points at which we'll have reviews. First of all, the Joint Biosecurity Centre will review this data every 3 weeks. And so we will have another review point along pretty soon. The second thing to say is we've got checkpoints built into this. The checkpoints mean that we're looking at what has to happen in a green, amber or red in terms of the requirements for testing and so on and so forth. So this will be a fast developing situation, but really the key thing to say is the reason there aren't more places on the list is there aren't more places that are in the fortunate position that the United Kingdom has got itself in. As Jenny says, people coming forward for vaccines. As I was saying, the vaccine task force and the government doing such strong work a year ago to make sure we were ahead of the world in terms of having those vaccines. So if you're looking for the answer, it is simply that the rest of the world needs a bit of time to catch up with our more fortunate vaccine position before we'll be able to open up travel to those locations. You ask a very good question about the situation with regard to UEFA and the situation for Turkey. And as I said in my comments, I'm afraid we are having to put Turkey on the red list. And this will have a number of ramifications. First of all, it does mean, I'm afraid, with regard to the Champions League, that fans should not travel to Turkey. The FA, I can tell you, are in discussions with UEFA already on this. We are very open to hosting the final, but it is ultimately a decision for UEFA. Of course, it's worth mentioning the UK has already got a successful track record of football matches with spectators, so we're well placed to do it. And I have spoken to the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport this afternoon about this. So we're very open to it. It is actually, in the end, a decision for UEFA to make. But given that there are two English clubs in that final, we look forward to hearing what they have to say. Thank you very much indeed. I'll turn now to Tom Clark at ITV.
Thank you, Secretary of State. While we worry about where we might be able to travel to, the virus is proving it's pretty capable of travelling into the UK. How concerned are you, and should we be, about the doubling of the number of variants of concern originating in India here in the UK? And how concerned should we be about the Indian variants compared to those from South Africa and Brazil, for example?
So, there are two places to answer this. One is, of course, with the excellent border protection that Paul Lincoln and his team are providing, which is helping us to keep on top of variants of concern. The second thing is, now that the variant in India is a variant of concern rather than a variant of interest, which it has been up till recently, I'm going to ask Jenny to comment on the epidemiological situation.
Thank you. So I think, yes, we should be concerned, and I'll come to the action that we're taking. But there is quite a complicated message here. I think so it's a good sign. We've seen the slides there, and our overall positivity rates have dropped dramatically. But in some areas, there are some variants of concern, particularly the Indian one, which have risen quite sharply in the last week or two. So those areas, we really do want people to be extra cautious. Again, it's important, just because that particular one, the B16172, one of the three variants that we're seeing from India, has increased quite rapidly. The other two, the one under the 3 number, are still variants under interest. And when we move them to a variant of concern, it's because we find something in how they're behaving, or some of the mutation that we think might give some cause for concern, either particularly in vaccine escape, severity of disease or transmissibility. Now, what we have with this particular Indian variant at the moment is that we found yesterday at the technical group, the variant technical group, that the transmissibility was at least equal to what we've been calling the Kent variant. It's the B117. It's actually very widespread, but people will recognise it by that name. And we don't yet know many other characteristics about it. It takes quite a while to understand, for example, the severity of disease, or what it means for vaccine effectiveness. So while we're watching that, actually, we are taking a whole host of steps to ensure that in areas where we have seen that, we have enhanced contact tracing. We're going in with messaging, working with local communities, with local directors of public health, to ensure that people are really aware of the potential risk. We're encouraging people to continue to work from home, all the things we know, socialise outdoors, even if the situation and the rules change. It's really important people continue to do that. And this is likely to be a bit of a pattern as we go forward. So we need the public to do everything that they have been doing in sticking to the rules, but in those particular areas to be being particularly careful. And we will continue to monitor it. I think one of the important things is the UK has absolutely brilliant genomics. We contribute about a third of the total global genomic sequences that are put up on Gazade. And so we have a very, very clear picture of what we have in terms of variants of concern and under investigation.
And of course, the reason why we're taking variants of concern so seriously is one of the reasons in response to the previous BBC question that we're not opening up too fast, because we want to be in a position to control it. And it's one of the reasons why Paul Lincoln and his team are checking 100% of people at borders, although that will increasingly on the green list countries start to become a digital check through the e-gate and the passenger locator form over time. Can we go to Paul Kelso of Sky? We can see you there, Paul. I don't know if you can hear us or not.
I can now. Can you hear me now?
We're loud and clear.
We know that the travel industry is desperate to get restarted. Gatwick, where I am, is deserted, but we've seen already prices starting to soar as a result of speculation around this list. And we know travel companies are declining to offer refunds even for people with pre-existing reservations to countries on your orange list. Is this system not simply making travel the preserve of the rich? And if I may, with respect, a fortnight in the Falklands isn't most people's idea of a summer holiday. Is it realistic to think that this year we will see the return of mass travel to Spain, to France, and other really popular destinations, as opposed to this tiny list of many islands?
Thanks very much. Look, Paul, the first thing is that it's very important that people do check the terms and conditions of booking very, very carefully. You mentioned travel companies and what people would have called travel agents, perhaps in the past. It is the case that if you're booking a package, for example, I've extended the ability of people to get not just refunds, but also travel vouchers, which will be guaranteed through the scheme that people know of as ATOL, so that a voucher can be given. It perhaps creates a little bit less stress on the travel company for those refunds, the package holiday, but at the same time provides the reassurance for consumers, whereas previously providing cashback was the only option. So the government's tried to back the industry in that sense. But it is possible for people to book direct. We do know that sometimes that may lead to problems, and certainly I've had plenty of people in the last year contact me in that position. So please check very, very carefully when it comes to terms and conditions. And I note now that a lot of the travel companies and a lot of the airlines have put some very smart packages in place, enabling people to change, for example, the time of their flight, the date of their flight, without cost for doing so. But check. Secondly, does it become the reserve of the rich? And do you want a holiday in the Falklands? There are other locations on there, although I'm sure the Falklands is lovely. But look, this is not a list generated and created to, if you like, think about where people want to lie on beaches and then twist the science to fit it. That would be completely wrong. It would go against everything that we have said about. In fact, it would betray the sort of what everyone has gone through for the last year, the sacrifices that people have made, staying home, going to get the vaccine when called, the enormous national effort. If we were then to throw it all away and just say, well, we'll add some holiday destinations on, we cannot do that. And I hope people will, and I think people will appreciate and understand that. What we can and will do, though, is review the list very regularly. And Jenny will correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned 12 fatalities, deaths per day on a 7-day running average. When I came in, I checked where France is at. I think it's about 220 fatalities per day. We just need to give other places in the world a chance to catch up, and some of those places are the locations where people will want to go on holiday. So to answer your last question about whether we'll see mass travel or not, look, I think we will gradually see an opening up. We see that the vaccines are extremely effective. But what we can't do and what we don't know is the extent to which somebody who is vaccinated might still be capable of carrying a variant of concern back with them, and we cannot put the British people at risk in that way. So it's a gentle, gradual thing. As I mentioned before, Heathrow and others are welcoming the steps today. It is a first step, but it's a very deliberate one with some clear review points in there as well. Jenny, I don't know if there's anything.
I think you've mentioned all the important things. It is just really important, as you said earlier, that we progress with necessary caution. And you can see, I mean, I think the public will have realised just from looking at the picture in India just how quickly virus can take off, particularly if there is low vaccine coverage in those countries, or you have a large number of people without spacing and all of the things that we've got used to doing. So obviously that varies significantly across the world, but there is a regular review point. The Joint Biosecurity Centre has a very detailed exploration of all of the different criteria, so whether it be testing capacity, whether it be the capability of a country to look at the genome sequencing, whole host of things that we didn't have last year. So I think a lot of reassurance that all of this is looked at in great detail, and as countries are able to move into those different traffic light areas, then ministers will be able to make those decisions.
I think it's worth actually saying, as Jenny hinted at, the Joint Biosecurity Centre last year would use pretty blunt information, really. It was about the number of cases per 100,000 over a 7-day period. This year, it's about not just the prevalence of cases, it's about the variants of concern. It's about the ability of the country to test, the quality of their data, how good their genome sequencing is. And I think reassuringly, Paul, all of that's going to be published this year, both the methodology and the data, so people can see themselves how and why the particular countries and territories that are being included at the moment are in there, and I think that will be helpful for everyone. Thanks very much, Paul. Can we go to Lucy Fisher of The Telegraph?
Thank you. 2 quick questions, if I may. Firstly, for Mr. Lincoln, will Border Force deploy more staff to ease delays at the border, and if so, how many? And secondly, a question for the Transport Secretary, please. Vaccinated Britons are allowed to travel to other countries without having to take expensive COVID tests or quarantine, but the UK government insists on these measures from vaccinated travellers. Why doesn't the government have faith in the vaccine, and will this policy be reviewed?
Thanks very much, Lucy. Paul.
Yes, thank you, Lucy. I mean, we will, and I said in my opening statement that we will be increasing the number of Border Force officers who will be available to process passengers at immigration desks. I mean, I should put this in the context that there are currently, at the moment, more Border Force officers processing passengers at Heathrow than any other time since 2012 Olympics. And the reason why people talk about this is because we have had to deal with a lot of non-compliant passengers, and that sometimes takes Border Force officers away. So what I'm very pleased to have announced today is the simplification of the processes we've put in place, which should make it easier for passengers, should make it easier for carriers, it should make it easier for our officers, and do our best to speed people through the border.
Thanks very much. In answer to your second point about vaccinated Brits being allowed to travel to other countries, actually, when I look around the world, and as I mentioned in my comments, I chaired a meeting of the G7, the Group of 7 Secretaries of State for Transport in the week, and actually they don't have systems in place for travel yet. They haven't launched their equivalents of the Global Travel Task Force, nor do they have traffic light systems. Actually, by and large, because we have managed to vaccinate a higher proportion of the population faster than other countries, we're also ahead in terms of this unlock programme, both the wider roadmap, of which the 17th of May and the 21st of June are the third and fourth moments, but also in terms of unlocking travel. But you ask a really interesting question about, well, if you've been double vaccinated, why shouldn't you be able to go travel? And it's a question, of course, we're asking all the time. And again, actually, I'm going to lean on that advice here from Jenny, because I think it's one of the things, the questions that scientists are having to tackle most at the moment.
So, thank you. So I think from what I've said previously, we are learning a lot about the vaccines. So we're very confident that for most variants out there at the moment, the vaccines that we're using will protect the individual from serious disease and from hospitalisation. We think also that there is a degree of effectiveness in vaccine transmission, and there was some media on that, I think, at the beginning of last week. However, there are 2 particular points. One is that is not a complete picture. So some people, all vaccine programmes actually, that will not work for every single individual. So we encourage as many people as possible to reduce the chance of disease being around. But we don't yet have absolute clarity, I think, on the transmission risk. And that continues to be the case as new variants arise. So we know, as I've said previously, there are thousands of variants. And every now and again, they're not all of significance. Many will appear and die down again and be of no concern at all. But the South African variant, of course, we've done, that has risen a little bit in the UK, but has been reasonably contained. Each of these actually suggests that there is a little lowering of the effect of the vaccine in that case, and each new variant we're looking to make sure that vaccines continue to be effective. So as a new variant arises, if you're going over to another country, particularly if they have lower genomic sequencing capabilities, they're very unlikely to know what they have in their population, and individuals will potentially bring it back to this one. And one of the important points I would just like to make is when travellers are coming back, it is absolutely critical that they have their early test, their PCR test. So they have one before they leave the other country. They must, if they're positive, they must comply with local isolation regulations. But when they come back into this country, they must have a PCR test up to day 2, so in that very early phase. What that does is, firstly, we know whether they are sick and whether they need to isolate, but actually they are contributing not just to the UK knowledge about the growth of variants from different countries, but to the global knowledge about it. So we can sequence where others can't. We contribute that information to global knowledge, and then the whole world learns to protect themselves better. So really important to have that test.
Thanks very much, Jenny. And Lucy, I'd just say, as we've come so far, we just don't want to mess this up. Now, I think, would be the shorthand for all of that, and the scientists are working hard on getting the hard data to back it up. Thank you very much. If I can go to Torquil Crichton from the Daily Record, please.
Thank you, Minister. Can you provide some clarity? You talk about travellers from England, and your press release talks about England. You don't have Four Nations agreement for this by the sounds of it, and if you don't, it's a bit of a farce, isn't it? If I have a reader in Fife who wants to go to Faro and they're not allowed to travel from a Scottish airport, they just jump on a train to Heathrow, and they jump a red light. It undermines the UK Four Nation approach, doesn't it?
So, first of all, I should let you know that I held a call with the devolved administrations earlier today, and all of the 4 chief medical officers of the Joint Biosecurity Centre have met and agreed the principles that sit behind the traffic light system. So there is a large degree of agreement and cooperation in developing the system. I think, more to your point, there happen to be elections on, or rather election counts, in Wales and Scotland at the moment. And so, understandably, whilst those governments are in flux and there aren't effective opposite numbers to speak to, it may take a few days for them to prescribe as precisely what they wish to do. But it is with their agreement that if you like, the traffic light system itself has been created. And as we saw last year, I suspect that by and large we'll see the same conclusions, for the simple reason that the science is the science. The epidemiological situation is that presents to us all. And since we're working from the same traffic light system, it stands to reason it will be broadly similar in design. So that's the picture. We look forward to there being governments in place in both Wales and Scotland, and to having as joined up a picture as possible. Just on your final point, though, I would say what you sort of pointed out is it's possible for people to break the law. And of course, it's possible for people to break the law in all sorts of different ways, but people should respect the law as it is legislated in our devolved system of government throughout the 4 nations. And so we must never encourage anybody to, as you describe it, break the law, jump on a train and do something which they should not be doing, and presumably would carry some pretty big fines if they were to do so. Thanks very much. I'll turn now to Jim Scott at the Northern Echo. Jim.
Thank you. As the country exits the national lockdown and as more restrictions are eased, there will inevitably be an increase in cases. But if there is a spike in COVID infections in one particular region, such as the North East, is the government likely to consider preventing residents in that area from travelling abroad?
As we come out of this lockdown, we've got this 4-stage roadmap, and as you know and will have noted, we haven't gone back into a tiered situation. That's possible actually because overall our levels are so much lower, and where they're low overall, where the prevalence is low, you're able to take a much more national approach to all of this. And I very much hope, Jim, and I'm going to ask Jenny to comment, but we're not going back to those bad old days of very high levels of enormous prevalence and the rest of it, because we've got the one thing that we didn't have when we got down to these very low levels last time round, and that is, of course, the vaccine. Actually, I said the one. There's a second thing, which is mass testing. Every adult in this country, every secondary child in this country can have 2 tests a week, free, delivered to their homes, and millions of people are taking up that offer, and it's helping us to identify where there are problems. So we are much better positioned this year with vaccines, with testing, with genomic sequencing, to not need to take that localised approach. And so far, so good. But I'm going to hand over to an expert here.
No, it's a really important question, but I think the ambition is exactly as the Transport Secretary has said, that we know that there have been certain areas which I think we now would frame as where there has been enduring transmission, and it's those populations who have really had to be locked down for very lengthy periods of time, and that's not just unhelpful for them and a bit miserable for them during that time, but actually it will affect the health of those populations in the longer term as well if they've had higher rates of COVID, potentially long COVID implications and implications for the viability and the health of their families long term, so miss school and all sorts of things. So I think our approach at the moment is to actually really focus on those areas of enduring transmission in a number of ways, working with directors of public health and local authorities. There are a number of different community testing programmes so that where we see those higher rates, to go in to help support individuals to find infections and to help them to isolate. Many of these families are ones perhaps where they're more likely to have to go out to work or they're in large families, it's less easy to isolate, and there are a number of ways which local authorities can support them with central government funding through a communities fund to do that. But it's a really good point, and it is actually our focus of attention as we come out of the lockdowns and really focus as we go forward. And once again, just encourage if individuals are in areas where there are variants of concern, really to be extra careful in those until those rates have subsided.
Jenny, thanks very much indeed. I just wanted to end by saying, I could never have imagined when I became Secretary of State for Transport that I would be responsible for locking down all international travel, indeed most of the domestic travel network as well. And I'm pleased that we're finally in the position of opening up. I've been looking forward to today, or a day like today, for a very long time. But we do have to follow a very cautious approach. We've got to follow the science at every step. We don't want to throw away the very hard-won gains. But I think as confidence builds, as the rest of the world is able to catch up with our successful vaccination programme and get themselves vaccinated, I expect that we will see a situation where more countries will open up. But please check the details carefully, look on gov.uk, and make sure that you have refundable options, and most of all, of course, remain safe. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Grant Shapps there, the Transport Secretary, announcing the first green list, 12 countries that people will be able to visit without quarantining if they test on departure and arrival, including Portugal, Israel, Australia and New Zealand. Perhaps not massively helpful, those last two, because they're currently not allowing international travellers. There was also 3 additions to the red list: the Maldives, Nepal and Turkey. That final one quite interesting because, of course, Istanbul, the venue for the Champions League final. Could that be moved with 2 English teams in it? Well, let's bring in Paul Calso, shall we, our correspondent who had a question at that press conference. So, a slow return to some international travel, but it won't be anything like as we know it.
Yeah, indeed. It's entirely in keeping with the tone that's been set domestically by the Prime Minister and the government in terms of moving out of lockdown stage by stage. We were not expecting this to be a big reveal of lots of countries that many of us would have high on our list of holiday destinations, and it wasn't. It was a very short list, relatively speaking, 12 states, none of which, I think, Sophie, from our quick check that we've been able to do since the Secretary of State got to his feet, none of which are currently admitting Britain. So until that changes, the fact you'll be able to travel to them will be something of a theoretical exercise, though we may see perhaps some reciprocal arrangements emerging. Portugal, the one that most people might be thinking of as a regular holiday destination. It was interesting that the Secretary of State was very keen to stress that this was a rigorous process based on evidence, following the science, a phrase we've heard before. They're talking about the role of the Joint Biosecurity Centre in setting the parameters here. The things they're looking at, we know. How widespread is the vaccine coverage in the destination countries? What are the COVID rates, perhaps most crucially of all? How good are they at detecting variants? And that's why this list is short. When I asked him whether it was realistic to expect the big ticket countries, the places so many people go, Spain, France, Turkey, Greece and the like, to end up on the green list. He did say it was realistic, but it was striking that he said, we're not choosing places you want to go and lie on a sun lounger and then twisting the science to fit round it. So clearly the position is, the message very clearly is, they really don't want us travelling certainly as little as possible, and there's certainly not much choice there. But one wonders what happens to internet searches for flights and cruises to the South Atlantic, with the Falklands and South Georgia on that list, Sophie.
Paul Kelsey, thank you very much indeed. I just want to quickly bring you a result from North East Wales, Wrexham, because it does seem like there's a different picture emerging in Wales and England when it comes to the Labour Party performance. Let's have a look at this result. Now, it's a Labour hold. You can see there Labour winning Wrexham with a majority of 1,350. Now, this is interesting because really the Conservatives were expected to take the seat from Labour. They won the equivalent constituency in the 2019 general election. It was a key brick in the red ball that turned blue. Have a quick look at the share of the vote I think we've got for you. Labour there winning 37.4% of the vote in Wrexham, 31.4% going to the Conservatives, and this is a change in share. So pretty static there between Labour and the Conservatives. Sam Coates, Deputy Political Editor with me. Signs that some Labour are doing a bit better in Wales than they are in England.
That's right. I mean, if you look at those numbers on the screen just there, it's quite rare today to see the Labour losses less than the Tory losses, albeit by half a percentage point. Yes, I think that Labour advisers are slightly relieved that Wales isn't going worse. With 13 seats declared, Labour have 39% of the vote and the Tories 29, implied on 22. So it doesn't seem to be the kind of disaster that we're seeing in England. Remember, Wales is a list system. It is incredibly complicated because gains in the constituency section are then undone in the list section. So it's very early to say how this will turn out in the wash.
Interesting stuff. Certainly one to take a look out for and not just apply the same blanket rules across the whole of the United Kingdom. Now, let's just find out quickly what the travel industry is making of the Transport Secretary's announcement. Today, we can go live to Leicestershire and talk to Claire James, who is the Managing Director of East Midlands Airport. Are you happy with today's announcement?
Disappointed, to be honest with you. It's a start, but it's not what we'd hoped for. We had hoped to see more on the green list. So, yes, it's a start, but a disappointing one.
You say that you're hoping to see more countries on the green list, but is it not right that the government takes a cautious approach for now?
Absolutely. We've always maintained that public health is the priority, but given the success of the vaccine rollout, given our ability to test, and given the falling case rates in other destinations, we felt that list could have been bigger without being detrimental or putting the public health at risk.
What kind of countries were you hoping might be added to it then?
The Canaries, some of the Greek islands, we've seen the low case rates. I think what we're lacking here is transparency around the criteria. What are the case numbers they're looking for? What are the testing criteria in those destination countries? What are the surveillance capabilities? We're not clear on how the government are making these assessments, and that's what we need to know. And the public need confidence to be able to book and know what's coming.
How difficult are things for the industry now? What's pretty clear is we're not going to see an easy return to international travel for some time, even if there is this gradual reopening of the sector.
The impact on the aviation industry has been devastating. It's the worst event in our history, to be honest with you. We've seen passenger numbers over the last year at less than 20% of pre-COVID levels. It goes back to needing clarity and certainty, and clarity around testing procedures as well, so that consumers can book with confidence. We know the demand's there. We know people want to go on holiday, to visit family, to visit friends, and we need to make the process clear and the criteria clear so people can have a summer holiday.
What kind of criteria do you think there should be? Do you think it should be based on vaccination? Do you think it should be based on case rate? What kind of things should be considered?
I think, the government's right. They've got that criteria. We know that testing is part of this. We know that vaccinations are part of this. But let's be clear, our European counterparts are quickly catching up. They're a few weeks behind us. So what we could now do is signpost those destinations so people can book with confidence. What the industry really struggles with is uncertainty. And we need time to plan. The airlines need time to plan, as do people from a booking perspective.
OK, thank you very much for coming on the programme and giving us your reaction to that Downing Street press conference. You're watching Sky News. Lots more coming up on the elections that have been taking place across England, Scotland and Wales. We're going to be hearing Sir Keir Starmer's reaction to Labour's poor showing in the local elections, particularly those English councils and, of course, the Hartlepool by-election. How does he intend to turn it around? We'll be trying to find out.